Day 238 of the Ukrainian war map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another quick update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine today. And as always, I'll start off with the Russian military personnel losses. So in the last 24 hours, there has been an additional 430 Russian losses or so. Of course, these are just approximate estimates. And then when we have a look at the Russian hardware losses, today for the armored combat vehicles, a decent 16 Russian losses there. Then for the tanks, any day is a good day for tanks, but 6 is always a keen number itself, and artillery 15. There's also one chopper. It's actually not quite showing the way that I want it to here. It may not be a confirmed kill, and one aircraft as well there. But we'll move across to, before we do move across, I'll just show you my homegrown hobby again of the Ukrainian captured and working equipment. This one is starting to get more accurate as the days go by, but I still have a lot more high hopes and make it a much bigger and more usefully detailed infographic soon. And the sheer size of those tank numbers never ceases to astound me. Now we'll move back to the map, and I'll just start off with generally saying that the Russian army conducted 10 missile strikes, but also 18 airstrikes and 14 drone strikes as well over 10 settlements. So a lot of the main places that you may have heard of before, including Dnipro, Zhytomyr, Kiev, Kharkiv, and Zaporizhia. But note I've said 10 missile strikes. Previously, Russia have done up to 100 or so missile strikes in a single day, but that's just not any longer sustainable for them to do, particularly as they're dealing with, or we're talking about here, the PGM missiles, so the precision guided missiles. Basically, it's getting quite well known that Russia is running low on these. So they look to source them externally now, but at the same time, Ukraine is also sourcing a lot of their own air defenses systems externally as well. A lot of the time, Ukraine doesn't have to pay for them though to combat this threat. Now, speaking of missiles, we'll start out in the Kiev and Chernihiv districts, so a little bit all the way up here. These districts are actually pretty close to each other. And there were actually 2 missiles that were shot down over the Chernihiv region. Now, this is the KH-101 type of missile that was taken down. And bear in mind, these are $13 million, so US dollar, in US dollar figures, $13 million of Russian stealth missiles. So that's per missile, so they're quite expensive. Which is odd considering in many cases I've found them to be less than accurate. Again, this could be the result of military contractors misappropriating these military or R&D funds and acceptance testing funds, and they provide something that is kind of a missile, but nowhere near as glammed up as they advertised it to be. And then that misappropriated money is spent on, probably, Russian oligarch yachts. Now, that was in the Chernihiv district for the 2 there. There was at least one of the same type of missile shot down in Kiev earlier today as well. All in all, 5 out of the 5 missiles shot from Russia or Russian missiles were actually shot down by Kiev air defenses today, which is pretty impressive. Then we'll move across to the Sumy Oblast, where there is quite a bit of Russian shelling in the Sumy Oblast, particularly in the last day on the border region right there. So you could say the border towns right next to the Russian motherland. Similar sort of thing happened in the Kharkiv region there as well today. So near the border, an ambulance were hit effectively. So there were no casualties here, but some of the ambulance personnel were wounded by the shelling. Now I might say here that generally speaking, When it comes to Ukrainian artillery shells, they are typically incredibly accurate. They don't fire much into the Russian side, but when they do, they're very good at getting their targets. Whereas on the other side, Russia, they fire a lot, but are conversely very inaccurate. Now, I may do a whole video topic on this one day, but for now, in other words, Russia effectively deals in indiscriminate shelling, basically putting them on the wrong side of history. Then we'll move down just quickly to the Donbass region, where the Russian forces set up an offensive near Bilorivka. You might remember this one. It's green because it's liberated more than 2 weeks ago. They're actually, so repelled in this area from the Ukrainian armed forces. I'm sure Russia would love to get a piece of that back, but I don't know. I don't think so. And the same can be said for really going down along the line. We're talking Soledar, Bakhmut, Pivdin, and even a settlement called New York. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this one, but it was actually named New York in the late 1800s by some German guy that came along. It did change its name for 100 years, but then about 20 years ago it changed back to New York. Now, if we look at the date map, we'll see what's happening here. There's actually not a lot of changes here today that we can see. This might just be more of a clarification. If you zoom in, you'll see that it sort of pushes in the direction of, a point for Ukraine, for lack of a better terminology right now. But as we all do know, very heavily contested region. In fact, this region that I've zoomed into right now, Bakhmut. Then we'll move across to the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So just zoom out there, and it's always sort of hard to see, isn't it? But it's the one that looks like a boomerang here. And as part of that, in the Kryvyi Rih district, so hiding to the very left or west there, the Russian forces hit an energy facility here. And on that topic, in nearby Zaporizhia, so the city here, which is Ukrainian controlled in the larger Zaporizhia Oblast, the Russian forces, well, in this case, they shelled some electrical infrastructure there as well. So this is pretty consistent with Russia's approach at the moment to shell largely civilian infrastructure, not even at the front line. I mean, they're doing it in Zotomir to the very west, in Rivne as well, in Dnipro city, quite far away from the front lines. So bit of a fear tactic campaign on the Russian side. It's said since they're not doing so great on the front lines, they're going to the rear, so to speak, like a baby chucking a tantrum. Or, as we say it in the country I'm from, chucking a tanty. Now we're going to move across to the Kherson Oblast. Again, a very highly contested front line there as well. So there was some Russian sources that actually said the Ukrainian forces have launched another attack northeast of the Kherson front line, which is pretty easy to imagine at this point. I mean, of course, most recently in the last few weeks, Ukraine, or the Ukrainian armed forces, took the whole northern part of this, and it's all liberated there now. But still, due to OPSEC or operational security, there's a whole bunch of things we don't yet know in this region. Just some of the basics, like the Novokhovka, this area here. The Ukrainian forces continue to strike a crossing here, which makes it very difficult for the Russian forces to traverse back and forth from the north to the south there. Oh, and this might be a little bit more of a newsworthy segment, but the Russian occupation authorities in the Kherson region, particularly the city, are looking to move about 60,000 civilians out of Kherson city, closer to Russia or Russia-occupied territories. Now, just to put all of that in context, Kherson before the war had about 320,000 inhabitants there. At the moment, it's got roughly 100,000, and the Russian authorities, or the puppet authorities there at the moment, looking to take more than half of that. Which I have to quickly squeeze in for that fact is that the transfer or deportation of civilians by an occupying power from occupied territory is actually considered a war crime. And Russia really at this point has no shortage of ticking those things off the list. Now, here's what I find interesting here. So, the Kherson occupation authorities are citing threats of destruction of the Novakhovka Dam over here, the reservoir, from the Ukrainian side, causing the sort of the max exodus or the forced deportation of the Kherson citizens to the south side. I think it's a bit of a false flag. The Ukrainian forces have struck Novakhovka Dam in a very specific location many times. Actually, right that bit there and over there. So it's not actually taking out the dam and releasing water for the reservoir. It's they've been very high precision. If they were going to do it, they've probably done it by now. That's why I call it a false flag. I think that the Russian forces may indeed realize they have to pull back from the north bank of the Dnipro River here, and as a result want to hold the remainder of the land here so they themselves might flood the dam. Again, that is yet another war crime, and I certainly wouldn't put it past Russians at this point, or the Russian forces at least at this point in time. And just a couple of other little quick things for this region here. So a Ka-52 Alligator attack helicopter was shot down on the southern front line here. It's always like Icarus, where its wings are flying too close to the sun, or in this case, a Russian chopper a little bit too close to the front line, and getting taken out by one of the many manpads that the Ukraine forces have. Oh, and just lastly, if some of you guys watch my videos, you will know that I always take the opportunity to advise of the loot that the Ukrainians find here, the captured Russian military hardware. And you might have thought that the T-62 tank parade was over, but no. There is yet another one that was captured here in the last few days or so, and we've just got information about it now. Then we'll move across to Mykolaiv, which is not too far at all. The Ukrainian armed forces actually downed 12 kamikaze drones in this area in the last 24 hours. Now, I couldn't get full information on this so far. We do know that they are the Shahed 136 cheap Iranian drones there. Being that there was 12, they were probably trying to overpower the air defense systems, which quickly brings me to another point. In fact, something in the news I'll talk about soon. But the German, there is some German air defense systems here. So we're talking now the Iris and the Gepard. The Iris T in particular, it's quite high-end, quite a modern NATO air defense system. We don't exactly know the location because it is something of a operational security thing there as well. So sometimes it's said to be in Kiev, sometimes it's said to be in Odessa, sometimes Mykolaiv. Whatever gets shot down the best is where I would expect it to be, though. There are more coming, and just keep on the air defenses coming to Ukraine. Probably number one priority from an international community standpoint right now. Then we'll move across to the news, and in similarly related news, the NASAMS air defense systems will arrive in Ukraine in about 1 to 3 weeks, as advised by the Pentagon. Now, they never give an accurate date. They do want to keep it on the low. And this delivery will include 2 of the NASAMS systems, each with at least 8 launches that will have about 50 missiles to fire each there. And interestingly, I found a report that described the NASAMS as extremely well suited for Ukraine because of the massive supply of missiles that NATO and its allies can supply, specifically for our air defense systems. For instance, you may have heard of the AIM Sidewinder missiles, the AIM 120s, the AIM 9X, all sorts of things that are actually air-to-air missiles. Of course, a NASAMS is a surface-to-air missile, but they can use those stockpiles that exist all around NATO countries. So that's just really compatible stuff going on there. So I'm really, really happy to hear that sort of thing. And in some other news, the covert mobilization of the Belarusian armed forces continues under the guise of training sessions. All we can do right now is watch this situation as it potentially unfolds. I just feel like Lukashenko, so the president of Belarus, has a feeling that when he invades with his soldiers, he'll almost immediately compromise his grip on power, either through internal or external forces. Remember that Belarus is a small country, about half the size of Ukraine, with about a quarter of the population. So I think he's trying to bat off Putin a bit, saying, next month, maybe, next month. And in some other news, Russian President Vladimir Putin announces martial law in the temporarily occupied regions of Ukraine, including Kherson, Zaporizhia, and the Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts, aka the annexed regions according to them. Now, martial law in these occupied territories may assist in making it possible for additional forceful mobilization of Ukrainian male citizens in those very locations. We're talking from the ages of 18 to 60 to be forced to the front line of the war. It still boggles my mind how Ukrainian citizens in these occupied regions could be motivated to do so. I mean, there's massive morale issues already with the Russian forces, native Russian forces, let alone these guys. Gee. And I don't know how newsworthy this next part is, but we've got this guy here. His name is Igor Girkin. He is a key suspect in the MH17 plane downing, if you might remember that case from a few years ago. This walk-in $150,000 check is trying to get back to the front lines of the war. That is to say, he's got quite a hefty price on his head. And in some more news, this one's more of a gag really, but as you may already know, newly mobilized Russian soldiers are forced to obtain nearly all of their own supplies just before going into war, and indeed the front lines of war. So we've got this guy here, some photos, a mobilized man, recently mobilized from the Ver Oblast in Russia, prepares for his final battle with the liver. And lastly, a bit of a funny to round it off with, maybe a bit cruel in a way. Now I've had to blur out the kids' faces here because of this video platform doesn't like certain things such as armaments or things relating to children. In this case, this relates to both of those things. So we've got this kindergarten just outside of the Moscow city center in Russia, and I guess it's just a regular day in kindergarten in Russia, because kids are entertained by soldiers who demonstrate their weapons, what they are, and how to use them. Even the teacher gets in on the action. This is just odd. And for me, deep down, it just rubs me the wrong way, or it just doesn't feel right. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one tomorrow. Cheers.